Jonathan, you've not started streaming yet, have you?
Yes, I should have just started.
Okay. The drop pages is not showing the current stream. Should it? I just see the old one. But if I go to YouTube, what do I see?
The people watching YouTube say that we're there.
Yeah, the YouTube one is like the source, so that one should always work. Yeah, so it's drop pages. It's not updated.
Okay. I'll worry about that after I get this capture thing going.
Alrighty. Just don't screw it up. No pressure. Oh, there we go. Let me mute that one. Okay, I see one picture, Jonathan. So far, so good.
Okay, everybody should be in the stream now.
I see, something. Is that an artifact of us all being in the same channel like that?
The fact that you're all in the same window?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, what if I hang up and then we try to get me on I can try dialing into the other channel.
Yeah, we could do that.
All right. I'll be right back.
Goodbye, Hal.
Hello.
Hey.
Now what?
Okay, now I can do the other thing.
Oh, cool. Too many windows. Okay, still looks different than normal. Is that because we don't normally have two people on?
Right, yeah.
Okay, never mind.
That's why it's kind of weird, but
it's okay.
It'll work.
As long as it's, as everyone sees us. Theater mode. What does theater mode do? Oh, that's kind of cool. Now you're getting fancy, Jonathan.
I don't really do fancy.
I was being polite.
I understand. I don't really do fancy. Don and Adam, can you still hear us?
Yeah.
Okay. You're just being quiet. That's fine. I think we're all good now.
That's the first for Don.
It's been a very long day.
Rest. Okay, where did my phone beep? Oh, that's because we tweeted. All right, so Adam, have you been on the show before, proper?
Negative.
I didn't think so.
Nice.
Awesome.
I'm a podcast virgin.
So, everybody in the chat room, thank you for joining us. And we'll get started here momentarily. Jonathan, how are you feeling on the audio side?
Sounds good to me. I need to turn myself up in my own ears, but other than that, it sounds pretty good.
Your camera is like zooming and white leveling.
I can change cameras.
No, it's working. It just was being flaky for a moment, but it looks like
it doesn't like me when I move.
Okay.
I don't think the light above me is quite bright enough.
I think I have a new camera since last time that we podcasted. I don't know if you can tell a difference at all.
Looks very sharp. I don't know. What are you using?
Microsoft Life Cam.
Okay. Yeah, it's the same thing I'm using.
Oh, cool.
I have a Logitech 920 or a 930, but for some reason the Microsoft Live Cam seems to work a little better.
Yeah. Cool. Alrighty. Then let's see. That's a tiny little Don. Can you like make the video bigger at all or not really?
If I do that, it'll push Adam off.
It's okay.
Well, you know what I can? If you want me to get really fancy, I wonder if I can do 2 captures of the same window.
I'm sure you can.
I'm not sure I can. Let me see.
I think everybody wants you to fiddle with it for no more than maybe a minute.
Okay.
If it's going to take more than a minute, then we won't do that. Hey, Jeffro.
How's that?
Did you change it? Oh, whoa. Ah, there we go.
Can I also do Adam?
Running out of real estate. TMI, Jeff. Don, I invited Jeffrey into the chat room.
I see that.
Okay. Oh, now it's looking good. I like that, Jonathan. Okay, stop. Tell me when you're done fiddling with it so I can start.
Okay. Mischief managed.
All right.
I wish I could get rid of this thing that's over Adam's name, but I don't think I can.
I'm not going to sweat it too much. So, I guess we're ready to roll then. Everybody in the chat room, if you would like to interact with our guests and ask us questions and such, then put a couple hash marks in front of it, like so that we'll see that and weave those into the conversation. And yeah, okay, cool. So we're ready to get started. Tonight on the PowerScripting podcast, we are pleased to have with us, we have 2 guests tonight, Don Jones. Hello, Don.
Hello.
It's good to talk to you again. And you are joined by Mr. Adam Bertram. Hello, Adam.
Hello.
So, Adam, you haven't been on the podcast before. Everybody knows Don Jones. Don Jones, the speaker, author, and friend of the show for a long time. But, Adam, you are a little bit slightly newer to the PowerShell arena. You are an MVP, right? When did that happen?
Correct.
Not too long ago. Was that a year ago?
Nope. This will be, let's see, it was 2 years. I have my 2016 thing. Hopefully I'll be 2017 here in a few months.
Sweet. Cool. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself since it's your first time on the show?
Well, been in IT since 1998 or so. Did the whole sysadmin thing for a long time. Got into VBScript. Did a whole ton of VBScript. Got into PowerShell about 8 or 9 years ago, something like that, and decided I needed to give back. So I started the Adam the Automator blog, and since then I've done a whole lot of stuff. So did a few Pluralsight courses. It was easy back in the day before Don was my boss at Pluralsight, but much easier to get courses through. But anyway, so did a whole lot of courses on Pluralsight, do a few speaking things here and there, and then recently got into Pester a lot, so doing all kinds of fun stuff.
So when did you start recording for Pluralsight?
I believe it was April of 2014 was my first course.
So
At that time, it was a bunch of SCCM stuff, but since then, I haven't done much SCCM in a while.
what have you been producing lately?
Well, I'm a automation engineer now, so I'm pretty much just in the DevOps space. So I do pretty much all PowerShell, TFS, DevOpsy things. I haven't done SCCM for probably 2 or 3 years now.
Gotcha. So what's the now you're an automation engineer for whom? You said Don's your boss, so I wasn't sure if you work for
Well,
Plural.
sort of in a roundabout way. I have my full-time gig is a senior automation engineer for a company called Genomic Health in San Francisco, and I work remote here from Indiana, so I could never afford the San Francisco real estate out there. But
I've been
been working there for probably a year or so now, full-time.
Is it not cool working for a Bay Area company but not living there?
Exactly. Living in southern Indiana where the prices are cheap, getting paid in San Francisco salary, you can't beat it.
I know. I'm a big fan. I highly recommend it to anybody who can swing that.
Highly. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little more about automation engineer before we get into the whole Pester thing. So do you guys produce software internally as a part of the healthcare? Is it a product that you provide in the healthcare industry, or?
Yep, it's the company is actually builds cancer research tests, and as part of that, we have an on-site development team that does a lot of web services, and our team is the DevOps team. We're in charge of getting the product out the door to the customers. Going from the dev QA and into prod, and making sure everything's good. So the majority of my time is, I'd say 99% of my time is probably just writing PowerShell, messing with it around with DSC, and just delivering infrastructure to the developers so they can do their testing on.
So is there much of a split between the developers doing the developing and the folks like yourselves doing the automation engineering, or do you all work very closely together?
Pretty close. I would say with the developers, since I'm remote, I'm kind of the redheaded stepchild, I guess. I'm kind of like, here, Adam, we'll throw something under the door and send out some work that we need. But as far as like the developers kind of do their thing, and then they just hand it off to our team. This is the DevOps team, and then we are in charge of kind of getting it out the door. So it's kind of like the whole pipeline. The devs, we're more closely related to devs than the engineering and the ops team.
So have you seen a change in kind of culture over time? I mean, how long have you guys been doing what you're doing, calling it DevOps, and do you?
Hal, your microphone just switched to your webcam.
Okay, thank you.
What? Oh. Hello? Oh, man.
Go ahead, Adam.
Just in the DevOps team. Couldn't help it. No, so before I came on board, it was they were all ops and dev, and then probably I think it was like 3 years ago. It was only a new team. So about 3 years ago, my boss decided, well, we need more of a team that's more development focused, but we are mostly all ops background. So all of us are pretty much all ops, but we are kind of dev focused ops. We're kind of the in between. I know I don't like to say that a DevOps team. I know that that's not really DevOps, but we are kind of like the in between. So we work heavily with the developers, and then once developers get the package that they're good with the code, we develop the test software, and then we are the ones that kind of push it along the pipeline out to prod.
So are you really in kind of an operations role? Because like we're doing more like dev engineers. Like we have engineers working with dev instead of ops working with dev in my situation.
Kind of like I work on a product we call environment orchestration, or EO, and this EO is in a nutshell. It's only it's a few dozen PowerShell modules that do everything from provision new environments to bring up new SQL servers to Don is totally throwing me off here with his What was I saying? Oh my God. I totally lost my train.
Something
of thought.
about Captain EO and
That's all I
Anyway,
heard.
wait, I'm pretty much a PowerShell developer.
PowerShell modules.
Yes. So this environment orchestration product is a bunch of PowerShell modules. It's in charge of deploying out various environments, bringing up whatever the developers need to test their software. We're pretty much in charge of building the tools to help them test their software and to automate infrastructure provisioning.
So, question from the chat room: want to hear about the pipeline as far as
Sort
the
of pipeline.
code
We
work?
use TFS for everything.
Oh, wow.
So, yep. So we have the developers sort of have their own release pipeline. So after they went through their testing little process, then our kind of pipeline, I guess you can call it, takes over. And then once we take it through there, then it's kind of hard to explain because we're still in that old phase where we see the benefits of DevOps and doing all the automation thing, but we're still kind of in its infancy. We've only been doing it for a couple years now, so we're still learning as we go. So the devs kind of have their own TFS pipeline, and then we kind of take their pipeline from TFS, bring it in to our environment orchestration product, which is just essentially a whole ton of PowerShell, which builds the infrastructure, and then it gets kind of pushed out to prod from there.
So you're just dealing with Windows servers and .NET code?
Yep, it's all a Windows shop.
Nice.
Yep. Luckily, no Linux. We're doing really getting into some Azure stuff now. This environment orchestration product is kind of we point it, we say new virtual machine. It'll provision however many virtual machines you want here. Recently, I implemented Azure support so we can just bring up Azure IS VMs. So I just had a meeting today. We're going to need to introduce some PaaS functionality into it. So we're going to have to start automating some web services and some API gateways and stuff like that.
Are you going directly against Azure or are you using Azure Automation runbooks?
We use the Azure PowerShell module quite a bit.
Okay.
And bitch about it quite a bit. I hope it's better. I haven't used it in a while, but we'll see. Has it gotten any better? I don't know. It's been 6 months, and I just had a hell of a time with it.
So I want to shift over to Don for a moment because I don't think I've ever been in a conversation this long with Don and had him not talk. It just really felt
I know.
kind of weird.
the chat room's been interesting.
Well, yeah, you're keeping that going, so that's good. So Don, why don't you tell us about the I guess the big project in the room here? You had a blog post recently about Pester, the book.
Yep. Yeah. So, if for those who haven't seen it, I took my first stab at agile self-publishing with the DSC book on a platform called LeanPub. PowerShell.org uses LeanPub to publish our ebooks. We give them away for free, mainly because they've got a really good markdown to PDF/EPUB/Mobi Pocket parser. And so I was kind of familiar with their platform, and I decided I wanted to write a DSC book. But Jason Helmick and I did a kind of a Kickstarter type thing for a DSC book, and we really had very few people sign up for it. So we kind of decided that DSC, at least at this point, is niche enough that it would never, ever, ever work as a traditionally published book. Right, like a traditional book, you take one of my Month of Lunches books, the cover on that is, I don't know, $29.99 or $39.99 or whatever it is. Amazon buys those from the publishers at a 55% discount. The publisher gives you, 10%, call it nominally, plus or minus. So you make basically $1 a book.
Oh, gosh.
And if you're going to write a big book on something complicated like DSC, and it's going to sell 300 copies, $1 a book that's not even going to take your family out to a couple of nice dinners to make up for the months of time they lost. So my other problem is you do a traditionally published book and you hand the manuscript over to the publisher, and they take 6 months to to do stuff to it. They want to copy edit it and make an index and cut down trees and make ink and all that. And by the time they've done it in a technology like DSC, it's outdated, it's wrong. So I decided to do the DSC book on LeanPub, and it's the idea is I can write the book, I can hit publish anytime I want to, and it'll take the latest source code out of, I think that one's operating out of Dropbox. And they just make a new book and they notify everybody who's bought a copy, hey, there's a new version, come get it. There's no extra charge. So I've kind of been bugging a bunch of people to do a Pester something for a long, long time. And I get a lot of people telling me, it sounds like I should use it. This Jeffrey Snover guy keeps talking about it. I hear all these people talking about it, but I look at it and it's scary. So I finally decided, okay, you know what, this LeanPub thing has worked out well enough that I think it might be worth doing a Pester book that way. Pester being an open source project that the community runs, despite the fact that it ships in Windows 10 and later, has the potential to change even more than DSC does. So it's not one of those things you would want to do a print book for. So I contacted Adam and kind of explained my idea, and he said, yeah, let's do it. He basically has a ton of experience using Pester for real. I don't as much. I know the syntax really well, and I've worked with a bunch of people who've used it, but I've not used it kind of in the nitty-gritty way that he has. But I'm really good at organizing information. And so we figured between the two of us, we could come up with a really good thing. Adam could just say, look, we need to make sure we cover A through Z as well as, X1, X2. And I could kind of organize it into a story. And we're both decent writers. Our styles aren't that dissimilar. Adam has not done a collaboration before, so he can't type the word we. It's all I, so I have to fix all those.
It's all about me.
But it's gone well so far. I think we're, I don't know, nominally 30% through the material that we know we want to write right now. But kind of the upside is we're collecting all this stuff that we know we want to write later. We haven't bothered to organize that yet or work it into the storyline. And we don't have to, because we can kind of get our first pass done and then go back, and if it means completely reorganizing the book, it's not a big deal. It's just a bunch of markdown files, and we can do that. And of all the different community projects that have come out and kind of supplemented PowerShell, I think Pester is probably one of the most important. I mean, obviously Microsoft thinks so, shipping it with the OS, but I think it's the one that's going to make the longest and biggest impact on how people use PowerShell over the long haul. So I think it's important to get not documentation out there per se, because if it's just better documentation, then I think the right place to do that would be as part of the project's wiki. But get teaching, get tutorials, get a storyline, help people understand the context and everything else. And I think so far it's gone well. We've gotten some feedback from folks. We're always looking for more. There's an email the author's link right on the book's page on leanpub.com. And we're logging all those things. So that project actually runs out of GitHub. LeanPub can just pull the source right out of GitHub and make books out of it. So we open an issue in GitHub. Adam has a repo set up for it. Every time somebody suggests something, we're like, yeah, let's do that.
That's
so we're
neat.
Yeah, it is. It's honestly, I'm working on 2 projects right now that we're writing out of GitHub like that. And I freaking love it. It would never have occurred to me before, but I mean, at the end of the day, they're just markdown files, right? So why not stick them in there? I've even been out on the road and somebody will send in a typo and it's like, oh yeah, you know what? I can just open that in a web browser and punch it in real quick and commit it to master and go hit publish on LeanPub and boom, there it is. It's really, really cool. It's been a great experience. They're a wonderful small company out of Canada. We set a minimum price for the book and a recommended price. You can pay anything you want to from the minimum on up. So if you feel it's worth more than what we suggest, you can pay that. They're very clear right on the pricing page how much of that goes to the authors. Adam and I split it 50-50. So you know where your money's going. Unlike the traditional book world where you really have no idea how little your authors are actually getting.
That is, there's like several reasons to go use LeanPub for that reason. But does having it published or writing it in Markdown, is that limiting you in any way?
It isn't. We use Slack at Pluralsight, like probably half the planet at this point, and it uses our Markdownish type syntax for boldfacing and italics, and I mean boldface, italics, and code, and some headings and bullet lists. There's not much else you use, and so in a lot of ways, it's easier than Word. the thing I would say that we lack is I'm used towards markup features, the revision tracking and comments and everything else. But I have found as we started to go back and forth, and so what we've been doing is we open an issue for each chapter, and then if we want to make a note about something to be sure we include, that goes in there. If we need to make a fix or we want to collaborate out something, we can have the discussion right there. And that for me has kind of been better because I can have all those notes off to one side of the screen and I can have the document without all the stupid cross-throughs and underlines and balloons floating all over the place. So I'm starting to really get used to it. LeanPub supports a couple of enhanced markdown flavors that you can choose from. So you can get more creative than the base markdown would allow you. Although you lose a lot of those things when you emit EPUB, which doesn't support tables, for example, or some of the other HTML elements.
Gotcha. So let's stop geeking out about the publishing side, which interests me actually. But and let's get back into Pester and PowerShell. So you want to talk a little bit about the structure of the book, and Adam, want to hear from the things that you're contributing to specifically as well.
Yeah, I'll start with the structure because we just had to talk about that too. Because I'm the one who kind of has the organization in my head, and Adam's like, "Look, what are we doing?"
Yeah.
We're starting with a part one, which is like a very quick syntax primer to Pester. I know a lot of people will look at a Pester example and they'll be like, this is totally foreign to me. It's not PowerShell. I don't understand. I'm not in. And I get that. But if you spend, literally 5 minutes, the syntax suddenly becomes very elegant and straightforward in your head. And so I wrote out a lot of that, and then Adam went back and added a lot to that. The second part, which is what we're kind of working on and organizing right now, is, okay, now that you've got the basics under you, let's start actually using this thing in a bunch of realistic examples, which is where Adam has a lot to contribute. You probably opened 20 or 30 different issues in the past few days with things you want to make sure we're covering, right?
Every time I come by, I use Pester every day, and every time I have an idea, I just put up a GitHub issue and put it as discussion or whatever, and so it's a really good place to capture ideas. So I really like that whole iterative process that we're going through so far.
Then the third part of the book is going to be about measuring and improving code coverage, because that's kind of Pester obviously has a mechanism to help you do that, but there's a whole philosophy around it too that we want to make sure we cover. And then the last part was also one that was Adam's idea from scratch, and it's one that I would not have thought of including in the book, but I think people are going to like it. You want to tell them what that is, Adam?
Oh, you're giving me credit. Wow. Is it the recipes we talked about?
Yeah, we're doing a cookbook part for the second part.
Yeah. So after Don's really good with the like he said, he's really good with the instructional design and coming up with a story and a narrative, right? And I'm kind of the geek that sits in the dark and just works on Pester all the time, and I sometimes have a hard time explaining what's in my head, and Don really helps me with that. But so the recipe part was kind of my idea, because I learn by examples, and this is one of the discussions that Don and I had quite a bit, is because if it were me, it would just be just a big dump of examples and say, here you go, and then Don tries to remind me, well, not everybody can learn by just looking at some examples. Everybody's not you. So the recipes is kind of my idea for my take on learning Pesters, because I learn best by example. So we're going to have everything from, how do you do test infrastructure tests? So like we have stuff on GitHub now that John, you had mentioned, like testing Scorch run books, or testing. I just had to do some scheduled tasks today. So just scheduling, testing VMs. Just how to apply Pester to specific situations. And then we're going to kind of have a big recipe section on that. I'm sure that will just grow until who knows how that's.
I think that's super important. You think about the success of Lee's book, the PowerShell cookbook. Everybody loved that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so that was something, and it's one of the reasons that it never occurred to me to do a cookbook section. I've always imagined those as separate books, and the problem with them for me is that you get it, and it lasts for 2 or 3 years before you get another one, because that's how long you really go between editions of books in the traditional book publishing world. But, again, not to geek out about the model too much, we can go add a recipe every time we feel like it. If Adam has a day at work and comes up with 3 things, he's like, man, these were really hard to figure out. Great. We can shove those in and suddenly there's a new edition and everybody who bought the book gets it. So I titled it the Forever Edition because if you buy it from LeanPub, it is literally the last one you'll ever have to buy. It's like a paid upfront lifetime subscription, and we can just keep building this thing over time.
Are you also going to cover the operation validation framework, or do you consider that too separate from Pester to want to cover?
We haven't talked about it much yet.
Okay.
I don't know what that is, so I think we need to define that for the listeners.
So that's something that Jim Truer has done, and it's on GitHub, and it's kind of, I think of it as almost like a wrapper for Pester, like a way to automate running Pester tests, I guess. Can somebody explain that better than me? I hope.
I can explain it to some extent, but yeah, I mean, I don't have a whole lot of experience with it. I have used it, and I've written a few articles on it, but I thought about putting. I think there's actually an issue on there about it, but I mean, in my opinion, that it's a good tool, but like you said, it's just it's kind of it's a DSL on top of a DSL, and I know Morawski hates that, and I don't care for it either because, I mean, I think that Pester is easy enough to use and easy enough to build tools around that you can pretty much build your own in a fairly decent manner. So I think we should probably at least do some mentioning on it. Like Don said, we haven't really talked about it much, but I think it's something that we need to at least address.
So an example, the way that I'm using Pester right now is I have Pester tests that check infrastructure. So is this server up? Is it, listening on this port? Is this service running? Yada, 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 to make sure that all the pieces are in place for some automation that I'm doing through Scorch. I would love to automate those tests. The problem is capturing the output from Pester. The format that it comes out in is not ideal for that type of scenario. So I think that's where something like the validation framework or writing something around it makes sense just because of the nature of Pester.
Yeah. Are you using the pass-through to get the object out instead of the host, the console output?
No, I'm not.
Yeah,
right
use
now.
pass-through. It'll come out. All that output will come out as an object that you can consume.
Okay. Well, that makes it easy then.
Yeah, it's much easier that way with pass-through. Actually, we don't have that. I need to make an issue for that right
here
now.
we go.
That's something about Pester I didn't know. If I only had a book.
So, Don,
that's not in there,
there's
but
a couple questions for the chat I wanted to hit you with real quick. Can people pay more later as the book gets fleshed out?
No, you can't. You could buy another copy if you had a different email address to use. It's a really neat idea though, given the model. I'm going to mention it to Len, who runs LeanPub. They've been really, really open to ideas and suggestions, and that seems like it might be something pretty easy to implement.
They've already got all the payment systems.
I think it's a good idea. There's a lot of projects that are doing this kind of step at a time, and we've started with a fairly low price that we will eventually rise as more gets added to the book. We're not going to try and gouge anybody. We just, we want to make sure there's value there.
So another question in this vein, how do we know what changes? Is there a change log when you guys update the book?
There isn't. Because I'm not sure the computers could do anything more than like a giant diff, which I'm not sure would be useful. So there's no automatic change log. But we have a changelog chapter. So with our next big build that we push out, there's a changelog chapter, and we're just going to kind of manually note the highlights. It's not going to be corrected a typo in chapter 54. It's not going to be that level of detail, but for the major changes that we go in, we'll make sure that we do that.
And just as an aside, I want to just kind of say thanks to the folks in the chat room. I mean, there's been, 2 people that have bought the book while we were talking, and like 5 others that have said they'd already bought it.
Thank you.
So that's kind of cool.
So far, it's been doing great, and I really like working on it because previously that I was just banging out articles all the time on Pester because I was so into it. Now I just kind of have a one source where I just push everything up there, and it's kind of nice that we can do that release. But yeah, I yawn with the publishing model. But yeah, so far, me being my first experience with an actual book, it's been great. I'm glad I didn't do a print book.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of past print books myself. Jeff Hicks and I are working on a project that we went back and forth for a couple of months about how we were going to do it, and we're going to do it on LeanPub.
Yeah, I just saw that. Go ahead.
I'm just kind of floored by the continued response. I don't know. We've not had that type of thing happen on the podcast before. It's kind of cool. Jumping back into Pester though, like let's say that I am not testing my code right now. Can you tell me the best place to get started? Like how would someone get started in Pester?
Well, I mean, so I think the first thing is obviously if you're not running on a copy of Windows that has it, get it. And then if you're willing to so LeanPub allows us to publish a free sample. Grab the free sample if nothing else. Incidentally, they have a 45-day no questions asked guarantee. If you buy it and you're like, this is a piece of garbage, you can push a button and they will refund your money and you get to keep the book anyway. So there's really no risk to buying it. Take a look at it. In the first part, we kind of walk through the half dozen, and we're talking like literally 6 major elements to its syntax. This is not a massive language that you have to learn. There's like 6 things. And we walk through with some examples and you can take a look at it and you'll get a really good idea right up front. Oh, okay. So I've written this function that's got 3 parameters. I should probably make sure I'm writing a test to send each parameter whatever type of data it's going to get. And there's this one little area that might break if you do this wrong thing to it. So I should write a test that deliberately tries to break it to make sure that my code recovers okay, or whatever. And you start to pick it up. Now, don't get me wrong, you can go really far down a rabbit hole, and depending on what you're testing, it can get pretty complex. But if you've got a fairly basic PowerShell function, it's not that hard. So for the one chapter that I wrote, which was kind of okay, let's look at something real. Warren Frame, Rambling Cookie Monsters, invoke parallel function.
Yes, that's my favorite thing.
Oh, so I've not ever looked at his source. So I went and grabbed the source and did not look at his tests. Now he has Pester tests. I did not look at them. And I just kind of went through and said, okay, here's the 3 major things this does. Let's write a test for that. And I came up with pretty close to the tests that he had. He was accommodating for some different situations I hadn't thought of, which I'm sure he came up with over time. But you can kind of get a feel for the process of it. And it's really more thinking that process. Once you've thought through the process, then you get into okay, how do I physically do that? Which is where hopefully things like recipes will help and finding examples. And then Pester has just a lot built in that helps make it easier.
And I wanted to mention that's one of the big things that I wanted to really focus on, because I've heard so many people say, well, okay, yeah, the syntax looks great. Yeah, that's obvious. I know how to write it, but what do I write test for when you're starting out? So a big part of part 2 is I'm going to really get in there and try to explain, give you not just, the book is not going to be just on Pester, but a lot of it's going to be on testing methodologies and testing, best practices, and give you some hints on, well, here's a good time when you should test for this, or here's a good time when you should test for this, and kind of give a base structure that you can use to then learn from and then build your own tests.
Very nice.
And I think the moral too is, people. It's almost the same thing with PowerShell. If somebody says, "Okay, I want to write a PowerShell script," obviously the first thing I have to tackle now that I'm new to PowerShell is our new user provisioning process, because that is the most complicated thing with the most moving parts. And so I must conquer that, or I have failed, and it's not worthwhile. And obviously that's not the right way to start. Right? Start with a piece of that and conquer that little piece, and then grow. Well, Pester's the same thing. Just because you've got a function and you're thinking, my God, this is going to involve 150 tests, there's value in writing 2, right? Those 2 are things that you will never have to worry about manually again. And then you can write a 3rd one and a 4th one. There is value in just doing a little bit, and that's valuable in production. So it's something that you can start with. It's not like Pester's going to say, oh, look, you've only tested 1% of your code. You're a failure. you've tested 1%. That is more than 0, and tomorrow you can move on to 2%. So it's something that you can grow and build on. It's not something that you have to, commit to. It's not like changing from iPhone to Android. You don't have to throw everything away and start over. You can just gradually build.
Or you can do what I did and just write a Pester test to test some infrastructure stuff, just to get a feel for the syntax.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Pester doesn't necessarily have to test. You don't have to have any code in it at all. You can write tests just to, like you said, just test the way if your infrastructure is provisioned correctly.
So, Jonathan, what does a test like that look like? I mean, if you're just kind of pseudocode.
It just looks like a PowerShell script that says, define, or I forget what the syntax is because it's a little weird, but they have the part that's like the definition, it's what it is, describe, test of web server, and, should be listening on port 80, should be, if you're doing API testing, you can say, okay, well, if I do invoke REST method, I should get a response, and the response should be this. And then when you run it, if everything's up and running, you get all green. If something's down, it'll tell you what test failed, so you know what piece of your infrastructure you need to go take a look at. So in my case, we have this convoluted system that automates creating applications in SCCM, and there's web front end piece, and there's APIs, and there's Scorch runbooks, and there's runbook servers, and there's database servers, and all this stuff that all has to be working properly in order for the automation to work as expected. So I wrote these tests that test those individual parts to make sure that all that stuff is working. So if somebody's having a problem, I can just run that script and immediately see, oh, okay, well, there's a problem on this runbook server because the runbook service isn't started, or I can't contact the database, so I know that there's a problem with Orchestrator. So I can immediately know, okay, well, is there a problem? Where in the world is the problem? And it helps with stuff like that. But that's just, that's not the normal way to use Pester, but it is a way to use Pester.
Yeah, and one way some people think about it is, let's say you're in a shop that's starting to do DSC. So you've written all your configuration scripts, you've run them, you've made MOFs, you've set up your pull server, blah, 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 blah. And now you want to make sure that the config actually did what you thought it would do. So the traditional way would be to go log on to whatever it was and start poking around in the GUI and finding out. Well, you can just run Pester. You're not using Pester to test your configuration script per se. You're using it to test the outcome of that configuration script. So, one of your tests is connect to the computer. Oh, good, that worked. Okay, is it in such and such a domain? Yes, it is. Great. Does it have such and such a role installed? Yes, it does. Is this started? Yeah, and you can just set up all those things, and it's almost easier to get into Pester that way because you've got this configuration with all these little blocks that tell you exactly what should be what, right? First block, Windows feature, second block, this, third block, join a domain. And you just write a test for each of those, or a couple of tests, depending on what they are. And so there's a nice correspondence there that sometimes is easier to grasp than analyzing code and deciding what to test of it.
So I think you hit a really important point there, Don and Jonathan and Adam, right around the testing of infrastructure. There was a comment in the chat room. I'm trying to find it. Here it is. I do more infrastructure support than dev. Was curious where this fits in. So that's the point right there.
So you could write a Pester script that tests to make sure that all of your FSMO role holders are up and responding, or all your domain controllers are online, or all your web servers are online, or certain ports are open. Anything that you can run PowerShell and get an answer for, you can convert that pretty simply. If it's like a yes/no type of thing, it's pretty easy to do that in Pester because it's pretty much if it's a signal commandlet type of thing that you're doing, you can just drop that in a test, and then your output is really easy to read. If you write it the way that Pester kind of outlines it, then I think it's useful for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and somebody asked how is testing infrastructure different from monitoring? It's not necessarily. I view testing infrastructure as something that you do once or occasionally to validate, ideally to validate code you've written, right? If you've configured things in DSC and you validated that the DSC did what you wanted, then you don't need to validate it again because DSC will keep it that way. monitoring is not always just about configuration, though, right? We monitor health, we monitor CPU, we monitor memory, we monitor disk space, we monitor utilization. Pester's not a monitoring framework. You could certainly use it to say, okay, for such and such an application, let me just run this Pester script and make sure that all these things are working. That will tell you that the infrastructure is valid. You've got your 2 web servers, your database server, and the network is configured, but it won't tell you that it's healthy. Pester is perfectly happy to say yes if it's running at 100% utilization, which is not healthy. I'm not sure it's the right tool to measure health with. We've got lots of better, great tools to do that with, but there's definitely a connection between those, and they definitely play roles together in the different phases of the infrastructure's life cycle.
And depending on how big your organization is, you may not even have access to your monitoring tool, depending on where you are in your IT organization. So you can write your own little tests. And, if there's a big problem, then hopefully your monitoring team is going to pick it up. But how many times have you had a problem on a box and your monitoring team didn't pick it up, even though it's something they were monitoring? Because they're getting hammered by alerts to the point, and they don't have things tuned, so they don't know what's important and what's not. Because, I don't know if this web server is important. We've got 15,000 of them, but maybe it's a critical piece.
So I want to go back.
I can tell you. Go ahead now.
Go ahead, Adam.
Oh, well, I just wanted to kind of briefly speak to the context. See, I am when we talk about unit testing and infrastructure testing and all that. I use Pester every day to do unit testing and integration/infrastructure testing. So how I use Pester. So Pester can be used in numerous different ways. One of them is infrastructure testing, as you were saying, John. But since I write PowerShell code, I write scripts, I write modules, and then I write 2 sets of tests for these. They're both in Pester. So I write unit tests, which test the code logic. So let's say you have a function that has a logic branch in there. So you have, if then do this, else do this, else do this. So your code can branch out in numerous different ways. My unit test goes in and makes sure it follows the expected branch that I want it to based on whatever parameter as I give it. But I also have an integration testing, or you can technically, I guess you can call it infrastructure testing as well, which goes out and doesn't test the actual code. It just tests what changed in the environment. So maybe I have a function that changes some kind of registry key, or say a registry value or something. A unit test would actually test that code inside of there to make sure it's following the right code path. But the integration or the infrastructure test will actually go out and do a get item property or something on an actual machine to actually read and configuration values in the environment to actually make sure it did what I thought it was supposed to do.
And I think there's a couple of things for scope here that's important too. One of the two is that Pester doesn't magically know how to test things. What Pester is a way of organizing your tests. I mean, I could easily, like, if I just wanted to make sure, okay, such and such an application needs a domain controller, 2 web servers, these services have to be running, blah, 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 blah. I could write a script to do all that. Pester's way to organize that. It's a way of saying, okay, now we're going to test this, and I did I tested these 3 things, and they all passed, so we're good. Now let's go on to the next thing. Oh, of those 4, the first one failed. That means that whole unit failed, so I'm not even going to bother testing anything else. It was a failure. So that's important. You're still writing code. You still have to know how to check that it's a domain controller. You still have to know how to do whatever it is you want to test. So it's not magic. It's a framework to keep those things organized and manageable and sensible. The other important thing is the reason I talk about it in the context of I'm going to write a DSC config and I'm going to run it, and then I'm going to use Pester to validate that it did the right thing. I'm not necessarily going to use Pester to continually validate that in production, because in production, I want it fixed. And that's not Pester's job. Pester can go, oh yeah, you know what? That's not a DC. It should be. Okay, great, but that doesn't do me any good, because what I need is for it to be a DC. I don't need to know it's not. I need you to fix it, and that's not Pester's job. There are other things, Puppet, Chef, Ansible, Salt, DSC, that solve that problem. And so, thinking of Pester as a way of making sure my environment is the way it's supposed to be is kind of not really DevOps thinking. If the environment isn't the way it's supposed to be, the environment should damn well fix itself and not involve you. You as a person should not go, oh my goodness, there's a problem. It should have already just fixed itself. And we have technologies to do that. Pester is a great tool for developing the things that will make that happen in production, but it's not necessarily something you're going to use to monitor your production environment because it can't fix it.
Are you going to talk about the concept of test-driven development in your book?
Who put you up to that?
Nobody.
No.
Steve Morawski. He's this little voice that's speaking in my head.
No, not at present. And so here's why. We went back and forth quite a bit about this, and we had some opinions from other folks. And at the end of the day, test-driven development is a philosophy and a set of practices all by itself. The tools that you use to implement TDD really don't matter. If you're a C# person, you're going to get the tools that go with that. If you're a PowerShell person, you're going to get the tools that go with that.
Right.
Pester is one of those tools. Pester itself is not TDD because TDD is a set of practices, like driving. You don't get your car manual out to learn how to drive. Hopefully, driving is a separate thing that applies to all the different cars. Pester is a car, and so we're writing how to operate that particular car. If you want to use that car to go off-roading, or you want to drive on the highway or whatever else, you need to learn those skills. And TDD in particular is a complex and deep enough set of skills that I think there's already a lot of books on the subject. And I think
that's a good point.
Better than those.
That makes sense.
So there were a couple questions earlier in the chat. I want to make sure that we covered those before we went too much further. And it scrolls, because the chat room is busy tonight. Thank you, guys. Here we go. So it's a little clear about how to use Pester to test functions, because you're just wrapping inside there. But what about using it to test an entire script file? How would you accomplish that? You need to catch exit codes from the script?
I guess I can kind of test that. So whenever I would say, I want to say the downsides, but one of the issues that I first had when I first started with Pester was that it's all around PowerShell functions. So like if you have, it teaches, it's a good and a bad thing, because it taught me that I need to make more functions, even if they're small 1 or 2 line functions. Pester is really good at forcing you to write better code. So with that being said, so like say, for example, you have a script that just has a bunch of code that just does all kinds of stuff. There's hardly no functions in there at all. That's going to be, I would almost say, impossible to test with Pester. So whenever you're writing tests in Pester for scripts, for example, that script just needs to be a bunch of functions, and you dot source the script in with your Pester test. And once you bring it in to into the current scope, then you can write tests against the functions and not the actual big script itself. So that really assists in writing better code, because you're writing small functions instead of one big script. But at the same time, that was a big learning curve for me, because all of my code, I obviously is practicing. I was having bad, I wasn't writing the right code, so I had to write functions. And just doing Pester tests alone has really helped my code in the long run, I think.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. To use the car analogy again, because all things in computers can be described by cars. When the car universe decided that they needed the cars to be more testable, they came up with a standard diagnostics port. And in order to make the car testable, they had to have that port. In order to make your code testable, you have to write it. You have to design it to be testable. And that means writing tightly scoped, do just one thing functions, which is what Hicks and I have been preaching for about 4 or 5 years in the toolmaking book. And I know a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to. That's fine, but you can't have nice things if you're not going to do it the right. If you're not going to follow the right practices, Pester in a lot of ways is really not inventing anything new. Testing frameworks have been around for a long time. There's a lot of them for other languages, and these things are built around standard, solid coding practices. You're not forced to follow those coding practices in PowerShell, the way a more structured language like C# kind of nudges you into it. But if you're going to write sloppy monolithic code, you can't have the nice things. You can't have it be automatically tested because you have not written units. It is a unit testing framework. So you have to write small units that you can test.
Okay, where we go from here? I'm talking in the chat room about DOS TSRs. I'm not sure how we got there exactly.
Dot sourcing.
Yes, dot sourcing is really just a TSR.
So can you kind of let us know how much you've covered in the book as it is today, and what your future plans are? I mean, I know some of it is still, it's constantly in flux, which is one of the great things. You can, just add stuff as you think of it almost.
Yeah, I can tell you. I got it right in front of me. So we've got a solid first run at our first part, which is Meet Pester. So it's the concepts, it's the designing. So that whole thing about how you have to write your code to be tested. So designing for testing, there's a little bit of preaching about that. It gets into the top level describe structure. We talk a bit about before and after blocks. We talk about it blocks, which are your main unit of work for running an individual test. The should keyword, which is should command, whatever you want to call it, which is how you run something and then you tell Pester, this should have come out this way, and then it passes or fails based on that. We've covered a little bit about test cases. We've covered a little bit about mocking, which is a fascinating topic and is a key factor of all testing frameworks. So that's really all the core Pester syntax. And that doesn't dive 100 billion feet deep into any of those. It's a good overview. If somebody had a PowerShell function that consisted primarily of PowerShell commands, so you're running a bunch of PowerShell commands to get something done, that would probably give you enough to write a good solid starting set of tests. Our next part is part 2, using Pester. We're about 10% into that. We've got a chapter on code, or a part on code coverage, 3 chapters. We're about 10% into that. And then I think I wrote one recipe and Adam has spec'd out but not written, 3 or 4 or 5 more. So we're, word count wise, I feel we're probably about a third of the way through, maybe a little tiny bit less than a third.
I think we're even less than a third from all the issues that we have up. I'm just looking at all the issues and I'm thinking,
during the
I'm
podcast.
capturing things as the chat room is going by.
I mean, in terms of what we intend to do as kind of a V1 milestone. So so here's the thing with that. Books aren't going to get discovered on LeanPub the way they'll get discovered on Amazon. If somebody wants a book on Pester, they're going to open up Amazon.com and type Pester book or PowerShell Pester or something like that. So our intent is to get the book to a solid V1 and then release a snapshot of that as a first edition, as a traditionally published book through Amazon, through one of their self-publishing channels. Anybody who bought it on LeanPub will continue to not pay any more money, and then we'll go start adding more things to it. And eventually there will be a second edition snapshot that gets pushed out to the traditional channel. But that way more people can discover it. And the snapshot will be cheaper because you're not going to get the permanent updates or anything else. So it'll cost less. And we'll kind of figure all that out when we get there. But the goal is to kind of get the book to a good, this is a useful thing to take people from point A to point B. It does not cover the entire known universe, and then immediately start adding to that.
So LeanPub would actually let you do that?
Yeah, we own the copyright on it. They're just a publisher.
Cool.
Which is another nice thing. You're not giving up your rights.
Yeah. There was another question earlier about comparison to InSpec, and Adam mentioned PoshSpec in the chat. So, Adam, what's this about?
Yeah, well, PoshSpec is a tool written by I forgot his name now. Anyway, PoshSpec is about
Chris Wall.
No,
that's the Vester.
Chris Hunt.
Okay.
He wrote a tool to do. It kind of builds another layer on top of PowerShell to just do like infrastructure testing. So kind of similar to what InSpec does. Kind of more what Server Spec does. The spec tools. So with PoshSpec, you can do things like Active Directory user, blah, instead of, get AD user should be, this. So it puts kind of a more friendlier way to do it, or registry key, blah, should be this. You can actually define, it knows what a registry key is. It knows what, a VM is. It knows what all these objects are. And so it's an easier way that it kind of shortcuts the fact that you don't have to figure out what Don was saying. Pester is just a scripting language. You should still know how to actually get the data that you're wanting. PoshSpec kind of puts an abstraction layer over Pester, which allows you to take care of a lot of that stuff for you.
All right, sounds good. Now, those were requests to at least give a bit of an introduction to the concept of mocking.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So, I mean, at a basic level, it's I want to run my command, and it's going to take the input of some other command. So let's say I want to run get AD computer, and I want to give it a bunch of parameters, and I want to pipe that output to my command, which is then going to do something with those computers. In a real production environment, so in a lab environment, I might not have a domain to actually run that against. That's a possibility. In a production environment, I can't be positive what get AD computer is going to return. It's non-deterministic, right? I mean, I might think I know what a particular computer is going to look like, but I don't really. When I'm testing, I need to know exactly what my inputs are, because if something breaks, those inputs are my clue to what I did wrong in my code. So mocking is kind of a way of overriding a function, which is almost literally what it does. It overrides whatever function you create or you want it to, and it outputs a known quantity. So, if I mock get content, instead of getting a real file and reading its real contents, it will give me exactly what I told it to. So it's kind of a faked out version of the command that I would use just within my test, so that I could line up my command the way I wanted to for that particular test.
I have a question. That sounds to me like you could easily suffer from a bit of, how should I put this, confirmation bias in development. Is that not a risk?
Yes and no. It depends on how you write your tests. You need to, people talk about black box testing, and to do that, you almost have to be writing tests with someone who did not write the code, and they don't get to look at the code. They just get to look at the spec for the code. Like if I get to look at the help file, and it says, this accepts an AD computer. Okay, I'll mock that function and send it one. I don't really know what's going on inside the code. I haven't seen the code, and I'm going to see what happens. That's a little bit more straightforward of a scenario to imagine that being okay. If you're doing white box testing, where you know what your code is, you have to actively avoid doing that. You either have to make sure that you're sending it all the different edge cases you expect, or that you're otherwise being an upstanding citizen. You can't just send it the one easy one and get away with that. There's some responsibility. Pester is not designed to make you a better person. You have to already be a good person.
I'll add one thing.
I'm giggling at the image in the chat room.
I'll add one thing to mocking. I think a lot of our traditional ops people like myself, when I first started, I looked at mocking like, what in the hell is that? Like, why would I ever need to mock a function? If I want my function to call to run my function, why would I ever need to mock it? Mocking comes from your traditional software testing. So whenever I first started, I didn't even realize all this stuff. So I started mocking as a way to narrow down pieces of my code. So for example, let's say I had a function or a script with maybe 4 or 5 different functions in it, which had 4 or 5 different ways that the code could run. In order to build good tests for it, you need to narrow down the scope of what your script is actually doing. And with mocking, you can essentially mock it to null. So let's say that you have a function called do something in your script. If you create a mock for do something, then it just essentially does nothing. So it'll just continue on down the code. That way you can just eliminate, my favorite term is neuter all your functions at first. So approach that I have is whenever I start developing Pester tests for a new piece of code, I will essentially neuter the whole script to the whole function and make it do output absolutely nothing. Once I'm sure that it's doing nothing, then at that point you can start to release the mocks one at a time and do some coding in there to just test one piece of it at a time. So it's really good to do that as well.
All right, so that's the part where everyone looks at the chat room again.
Yep.
Sorry, I'm subscribing to a podcast.
I know, same here.
Yeah, I'm hoping
So,
that's the right URL.
I can ramble on longer if you'd like.
Our team is still learning about podcasting, so
You had a podcast, Don, like a few years ago for a little bit there, right?
it was more than a few.
Yeah, it was more than 10 years ago.
What?
Yeah, it was because it was before we started this podcast.
Yeah,
I
that was when
still
I was at
have
Sapient.
I still have signed books somewhere from that I won on the beer trivia challenge or something.
Yeah, that was me and John Hooten when I was at Sapient. Yeah. The new one is with Pluralsight. It kind of relieves my urge to create content, as well as gives me a chance to talk to some truly fascinating people. And it's kind of like what you guys do. It's really just an interview with, some news stuff on the front, but the interview parts are just incredible. Pluralsight's willing to have me go to conferences where I can sit down and have kind of face-to-face with 5, 6, however many people I can schedule, and just have some great talks. I've got about 8 episodes worth of interviews in the can that they're allegedly threading out.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Podcasts are fun hobbies and jobs.
So if you're looking for it in Overcast, which is the podcatcher I use, it's called IT Ops News and Talk. I'm trying to find an RSS feed. If I find it, I will drop it in the show notes so people can subscribe.
There is one.
Wait, subscribe via SoundCloud. You also have it in SoundCloud? How'd you swing that?
It's in about 3 different places. It's on iTunes as well, I think. Here, I'll paste the RSS and you guys can grab it. I think this is the correct RSS. This went through a couple of different iterations. Like I said, we're new to podcasting at Pluralsight, so it's a learning experience.
We need to talk PowerShell and Pester on there sometime.
We can.
We should.
So is there anywhere else that we should send people? Start wrapping it up here. The Pester book, of course, that's going to be leanpub.com/the-pester-book. John's got it. Don's going to.
And as far as just Pester learning in general, there's a good course on unit testing with Pester with Robert Keane on Pluralsight, and
yes.
I hope I have my infrastructure testing one published. Don, it hasn't been. I've been done for 2 weeks now.
Well, it was right around the holidays. I think
all right. Here we
some
go.
of our people
Here they come.
Celebrate Christmas. The other thing too is hop on the Pester GitHub repo. That Jacob and Dave Wyatt and the guys who've done all this work deserve a thank you, if nothing else. Hit them on Twitter even, and just say, hey, thanks for doing this. I don't want the fact that we wrote a book to overshadow the fact that they wrote the thing that we're writing the book about, which is hugely important. And again, because I will never get tired of saying this, it is, as far as we're aware, the first open source software that is on the DVD when you install Windows 10 or Server 2016. And that is a just massive, massive accomplishment. And it shows how much work they put into it.
So do we know to what extent Microsoft uses Pester internally? I mean, obviously they do, and I know they've talked about it places.
So much PowerShell is open source now. Hop up in those repos and look at the tests subfolders, and you can see how much they use. And I imagine they're using more as time goes on, but there's quite a lot.
Very cool. All right,
Yeah,
so
as far
I
as
think
I know, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Because I was going to cut everybody off and say goodnight. So you're welcome to talk about things that are relevant to the topic.
Never mind. I cannot pay attention and talk and look at the chat room at the same time.
I usually can, but we're actually quite busy tonight on the chat room, a little more than usual. So it is a good problem to have. And I want to thank everybody for contributing like that. So before we let you guys go, there are a couple questions that we do have to ask you. And Adam, you've never been on the show before, so you get to answer the question of, if you could be a superhero or have a superpower, who would it be?
You know, I've been listening to the podcast for years, and I forgot that you asked this question.
He would clearly be Captain EO.
Dean.
Who is Captain EO?
Oh my God, you are old enough to know who that is. It was a Michael Jackson character from a movie they did for Disney at Epcot Center.
No idea. You're the Disney guru. I'm not the Disney guru.
Wikipedia, look it up.
Okay. Let's go with that then, because I don't have anything.
You got to have your own, though. That would be Don's new hero.
I would say my first pick would be the Flash. Oh, geez. Now Steve's got that. Oh,
wow.
man.
For the benefit of the listeners.
Now whatever
Steve
I say is totally going to be dwarfed by Captain EO, so it doesn't matter at this point.
Yeah, Stephen just slapped a bad Photoshop here. He put Adam on top of a poster of Captain EO.
Oh, man. Okay.
That was nuts.
Next.
Next.
And incidentally, we are going to have, I forgot to plug this, we are going to have Pester sessions at PowerShell and DevOps Global Summit 2017 in April 9, 10, 11, and 12 in Bellevue, PowerShellSummit.org. Thanks.
Oh, yeah.
Highly recommended.
PowerShellSummit.org. And Jonathan, do we have a question for Mr. Jones?
He's been on so many times. I'm trying to figure out.
Probably did the island. We probably did the book.
Oh, yeah. Have we asked you where you like to go on vacation, Don?
Well, we already know the answer to that one.
I have three answers. We go
Mexico,
to Aruba, Hawaii,
Disney,
and a Disney park.
Mm-hmm.
Not all at once.
That'll be a trip.
What's your favorite, though, for like beach? Aruba?
Yeah, probably.
I have never been to any of those places.
I've been to a Disney park.
Oh, wait.
You've never been to a Disney
I
park?
misspoke. Yeah, actually, I've been to Disney like 7 times. I've never been to Hawaii nor Aruba.
I know. We're too busy working while Don's taking the vacations.
I technically specifically go to places where I can get good internet so I can work. I don't actually take off.
That's a good plan, really. I went to Disney twice last year, actually. Once for
Which Disney?
World. I've never been to the small one.
The original one?
Whatever.
That thing on the West Coast.
Yeah.
Yeah, the small one. I went there in February with the whole family. It was during the school break, and then we had a conference. In fact, it was the same week as Microsoft Ignite. I was in Orlando that week, and had my part of my family come down the tail end of that week after my conference was up. We did a couple more days in Disney, so that was fun.
Good times.
All right, I think we are done here. I want to thank everybody for coming to the chat room and hanging out with us. Good crowd tonight. And Don and Adam, thanks a lot for your time. And looks like the book is off to a great start. So congratulations.
Thanks very much.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
Good talking to you guys again.
I can't believe Adam's never been on. He's been listening to the show. He's been in the chat room for ages.
He's very shy. He's
It's
very
very cool to
retiring.
have you on.
I'm
Adam.
just usually looked over in this world. You know,
Well, now you're
doing
Captain
my
EO.
thing. I just stay here in my basement.
But now you're Captain EO, and people.
I'm never
see
going to live that down.
That's not something to live down.
Alrighty, guys. I'm going to go ahead and sign. Captain Eeyore. I'm going to sign off.
Good night, everybody. Thanks.
All right, take it easy.